Are UFO sightings and aliens among us for real? Official confirmation of unidentified aerial phenomena by the US military this year has left the world with more questions than answers.
The long-awaited Pentagon report on UFOs has finally been released.
U.S. government officials examined 144 reports of UAPs like these and still don't know what 143 of them were.
New report from the U.S. government about the existence of UFOs makes one thing clear: the truth is still out there.
So, what does theoretical physicist and futurist Michio Kaku make of it?
If they really are extraterrestrial, there's a probability that they've been observing us for many decades.
Professor Kaku has dedicated his life to finishing Albert Einstein's theory of everything, while exploring some of the universe's important questions along the way.
Who eventually loses if a war were to break out in outer space?
And how will the universe end?
Mother Nature has a death warrant on the human race as well.
In this episode of Talking Post, we sit down with the co-founder of string theory and author of the God equation to discuss UFOs, China in space, and more. Professor Michio Kaku, theoretical physicist and futurist, so nice of you to join us. You're someone I've always wanted to talk to for a long time. So let's start with UFOs, aliens among us, that kind of stuff. And I'm referring to specifically to the recent release of videos by the Pentagon showing these unidentified, they call them unidentified aerial phenomena. These aircraft that seem to defy the laws of physics. They're captured on camera by these military, these ships and planes. So where are they coming from? What is it? Are these aliens? Are they among us?
Well, you know, in the old days, we relied on hearsay and eyewitness accounts. Somebody saw something in the sky, but now we have mountains of videotapes taken by United States Navy pilots. We've analyzed them frame by frame. This is a goldmine of data. We now realize that they travel between Mach 3 and Mach 20, up to 20 times the speed of sound. The G-forces they experience when they zigzag is several hundred times the force of gravity on the planet Earth. They can descend 80,000 feet within a matter of just a few seconds, and apparently they can even dive underwater. Now compare that with modern technology today. We can barely hit Mach 20 with what is called a hypersonic drone. We think that the G-forces are so great that there's probably no person inside these craft. A person would be crushed by the G-forces of zigzagging in the air at that rate. So we think they're probably cybernetic, part mechanical, part biologic, who knows for sure. But then the question is, what are they? Well, it turns out that you're pushing the very boundary of what Russia, the United States, and what China can do. All three countries have admitted that they are working on hypersonic weapons. But this is cutting-edge technology. The United States abandoned hypersonic technology 2 years ago because they were unstable. When you zigzag, you could easily spiral out of control. And so the military said, well, let's put that for a later date. Now, of course, all three powers, China, Russia, the United States, are very much interested in hypersonic drones. But you see, these flying saucers, on the other hand, they go back decades, way before hypersonic drones were being thought of by the militaries. So what are they? Well, the short answer is we don't know. Maybe there's some kind of top secret experimental thing that we haven't heard of. But the United States military has now pretty much admitted that, quote, they are not ours.
So what does that mean?
If they're not ours, we don't know what that means. The military, if you read very carefully, if you read their entire analysis of this phenomenon, the United States military admits that, yes, there's a technology there that we're not familiar with. These things can perform gyrations and maneuvers that we cannot. It's not one of ours. Perhaps it's one of theirs. And so they mention other, Russia, China, perhaps another secret power that we're not familiar with. But what does other mean? We don't know for sure. But I think the military has now admitted that they might be extraterrestrial. It didn't say so, but it left open the possibility.
Isn't that astonishing for them to say it might be extraterrestrial, especially for a scientist like you, to hear something like that? And what I find quite astonishing is, okay, the fact does exist. Are they hostile or not? I mean, we're talking about decades of these sightings, and these things have been going on. Until now, nobody's been attacked. Nothing has been zapped. But they're there. Does it bother you? Does it worry you?
Well, let's say that you're walking down a country road and you see a squirrel. Do you go down to the squirrel and try to talk to it, communicate with it? Well, maybe at first you try to humor the squirrel, talk to it, but then you kind of lose interest because the squirrel doesn't talk back to you. The squirrel has nothing to offer you. The squirrel just runs back looking for nuts, looking for food and shelter. And so you pretty much leave the squirrel alone. So I would think that if they really are extraterrestrial, and I don't know, I certainly don't know for sure, but there's a probability that they've been observing us for many decades, not just recently, but for many decades into the past. These videotapes, some of them are pretty old, and they probably find us as curious, and they're probably interested in us, but probably not much more than that.
I do remember you've also talked about not trying to make contact with them because it may not necessarily end up well for humanity.
Yes, think of what happened centuries ago in Mexico when Montezuma met Cortez. Montezuma of the Aztecs made one of the greatest mistakes of the ancient world. He assumed that Cortez was a god. Now we know, of course, that Cortez was actually a bloodthirsty pirate after gold. But look at what Cortez had. Cortez had the horse. The Aztecs did not. Cortez had steel weapons. The Aztecs had bronze weapons. Cortez had gunpowder. The Aztecs did not. Cortez had the written language. The Aztecs had a pictorial language. And so it was no contest. And so I think that instead of reaching out and announcing our existence and saying, here we are, come visit us for dinner, I think we should stay away and observe. Simply observe them to find out what their intentions are, if they have any, and what their long-term goals are, and what their capabilities are. So I think instead of reaching out, which some physicists say that we should do, I think that's a very, very bad idea. I don't think we should make the same mistake that Montezuma made.
You did mention the possibility that it's highly advanced aircraft not from the United States, because the US military has admitted as such, but maybe from Russia or China. China, I find it highly unlikely that they have something as sophisticated and advanced as that. But in this golden age of space exploration, China is making quantum leaps. Not a month goes by without you seeing on the news Chinese astronauts going up to their space station, coming back to Earth, etc. Is China winning the space race so far, do you think?
Well, first of all, China has a plan to look at the next several years into the future, very deliberately, step by step, following the path already plowed by Russia and the United States, and doing it on an accelerated level. Going to Mars, for example, their probe was a 3-in-1 shot. That is, the United States first sent objects barreling past Mars, landing on Mars, putting a rover on Mars, and then, of course, more advanced drones on the Red Planet. The Chinese did it in one shot. In one shot, they had the probe, the lander, the rover, all in one shot. And so they're following in the footsteps of the superpowers, but doing it very methodically and very quickly. So I think they should be commended for that. I think they put an emphasis on this, and they should be commended for the fact that they have been skipping many steps. However, I also think that there has to be ground rules for the exploration of space so they don't get weaponized. I personally believe that we should have a new outer space treaty of 1967. In 1967, what did we have? We didn't have much in 1967, but the Outer Space Treaty had wisdom, and it had at least two major positions. The first position was nuclear weapons. No nuclear weapons in outer space. Second, celestial bodies cannot be claimed by any government. You cannot stick a flag on the moon and say that the moon is ours because we got here first. So those are the two major planks of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which is way out of date now. We have weapons that are non-nuclear, weapons that are killer satellite weapons, weapons that can blind the enemy in the opening shots of a war, laser weapons, kinetic energy kill weapons. All these weapons were not foreseen by the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. And you don't have to be a country to put a flag on the moon anymore. Elon Musk in SpaceX, he has his own moon rocket. He's even selling tickets. He's selling tickets to passengers to hitch a ride to the moon. And so if an individual, a private individual, could put a flag on the moon claiming lunar property, I think it's long overdue that we have a revision of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967.
Well, good luck trying to do a treaty like this when they can't even agree with agreements and pulling out of agreements and non-nuclear proliferation treaties on Earth at the moment. So I don't know, maybe one day, if we are optimistic enough.
But you see, nations do not sign treaties because they necessarily want to sign treaties. No, they prefer not to sign treaties. They sign treaties because they have to, because they're forced to, because they realize the alternative is costly, dangerous, and against their own national interests. And so I think nations will sign a new treaty when they realize that it's in their common interest to do so. You know, the Chinese have an expression, never pick up a rock only to drop it on your own feet. Mm-hmm. And so that's the danger. You can pick up space weapons, but who eventually loses if a war were to break out in outer space? All the great powers would suffer because communications, the internet, weather satellites, GPS, all of that is done in outer space. Everybody stands to lose if a war were to break out.
China's also talking about using its space station now as a launching pad to send astronauts to Mars eventually. Reality check, what do you make of that?
Well, there are actually several proposals to go to Mars. In fact, there's a debate in the United States as to which is the best way. One way is to use either, let's say, for example, the moon. The moon as a staging ground to go to Mars. Other people say, who needs the moon? The moon is just an empty rock in space. Let's bypass the moon and in one jump go to Mars. Other people say a space station. Perhaps a space station around the Earth, a space station around the moon. So there are very several proposals being made. The leading proposal is by NASA. NASA wants to put an orbiter around the moon, the gateway, and from that orbiter launch an ion drive vehicle to Mars. Elon Musk says, why bother? Let's just do it in one jump with its Starship to go from the Earth to Mars. And then the Chinese, as you mentioned, have their proposals too. So I think that there could be a traffic jam in outer space as different powers duplicate each other's efforts in order to reach Mars.
We're talking about private space exploration. William Shatner went up to space recently. But is that really going up to space? It's 10 minutes to go up and come down. And people talk about these people like the astronauts. That's very different from Neil Armstrong, right? You know? So how significant is what they are doing?
So we think that the space program is only stage one. But no, we're now entering stage two. When the price of space travel is dropping, rockets are becoming reusable. Competition is driving down costs because, of course, the private sector is not coming in. Billionaires are footing the bill. Taxpayers didn't pay 1 cent to send William Shatner into outer space. This was all paid for by private funds. Eventually, we'll enter stage three when mom and dad can go into outer space. And I personally believe that our descendants will one day honeymoon on the moon. So I think we have to realize that this is part of a long sequence of events.
Okay, still on the topic of China, but closer to Earth, you must have seen the recent reports about how China has apparently tested a hypersonic missile, a nuclear missile, no less. Now, of course, China has denied it, and you also have to take it with a pinch of salt because there is a lot of misreporting and gaslighting about China. But testing a hypersonic missile, China, and then given the politics between China and the US right now, what do you make of this whole business of hypersonic missile?
Well, first of all three powers have publicly admitted that they're working on hypersonic drones. United States, Russia, and China. But we have to put this into perspective. First of all, why? Why are the superpowers investing billions of dollars into hypersonic drones? The reason is the United States has put billions of dollars into its Star Wars system. That is a shield to shoot down missiles that come at the United States. That's the Star Wars program. But you can evade the Star Wars program by having a missile that can maneuver. It can zigzag and fool the radar of a Star Wars system. So instead of trying to build your own Star Wars system, which is very expensive, why not simply make your weapons zigzag, maneuver, so that you can pierce the enemy's Star Wars system? Much cheaper, much more efficient, faster, and you don't need to have sophisticated radar technology, laser weapons. No, you just have to maneuver your weapons. And so that's why we have this race, because the United States has bet on a Star Wars shield, while Russia says we can pierce the Star Wars shield at a fraction of the cost of the shield itself. And the Chinese are saying, well, yes, we see that benefit too. So far of the three, Russia is ahead, okay, in the sense that they've already claimed to have a system which works. The United States, as I mentioned, temporarily shelved their program 2 years ago, and now they're furiously trying to catch up in the game. And the Chinese, not to be outdone too, have also announced that they too are part of this race. And so how dangerous is this? Well, first of all, any competition between the great powers is dangerous inherently, but it's not as dangerous as when the ICBM first came on board. The ICBM was a game changer. Push button war. That changed the whole nature of the calculus between the great powers. So the ICBM was a real game changer and pushed us to the very brink of nuclear war. Hypersonic weapons are sort of like a modification of that.
Continuing from what you just talked about just now, so which is the space race and the weaponization of space, etc. Are space weapons and nuclear weapons going to wipe us out first, or is it going to be the laws of nature and evolution?
Well, you ask a very important question. Look at the short term and look at the long term. The short term, we have, of course, the question of global warming, the question of nuclear proliferation, the whole question of germ warfare. These three things can wipe us out on the planet Earth. But if you take a look at the long term, Mother Nature has a death warrant on the human race as well. On a scale of 10,000 years, we're going to have another ice age. We ended one ice age 10,000 years ago. We're headed for another one 10,000 years from now. On a scale of 10 million years, we have to worry about another asteroid impact. After all, look at the dinosaurs. How come there are no dinosaurs here today? Because the dinosaurs did not have a space program. They were helpless when that meteor or asteroid hit Mexico 66 million years ago. We do have a space program, and on a scale of 5 billion years, the sun will eat up the Earth. In other words, the poets ask the question, will we end in fire or ice? We know the answer. Our cities will end in ice, but the Earth will end in fire. The sun will eat up the Earth 5 billion years from now. And then the sun itself will die in ice as it uses up its fuel, and the universe will die in ice when it expands to the point that temperatures reach absolute zero. So in other words, physics has a death warrant for all life in the universe. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I personally believe, and this of course is pure speculation, that if we survive into the millions of years in the future, we'll have the power of the unified field theory, the power of string theory, the power to manipulate gravity in space and time. And at that point, billions and billions of years from now, we may want to create a lifeboat, an interdimensional lifeboat to leave our universe and go to a neighboring universe which is warmer, another parallel universe, which is parallel to our universe, so that we can leave our universe and then mess up that universe as well. So we'll have two universes to mess up.
Wow.
If we can go to a parallel universe.
Wow.
And parallel universes are allowed by string theory. In fact, up to 11 dimensions, we think, can coexist with our universe.
Wow, on that very conflicting note, grim, but at the same time there is optimism, and time always flies when you're having a good time. So we've reached the end of our discussion, but I do want to end on an optimistic note for you, Professor, which is I do hope that within your lifetime you will be able to come up with this neat equation for the theory of everything, and you maybe will help save the human race.
Well, let's hope so. And if any of your listeners ever find the unified field theory, I have a word of advice. Tell me first, and we can split the Nobel Prize money together, you and me.
All right. Amen to that. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for educating me and perhaps educating some of our viewers too who will be watching this. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.